here with Ben today, and we're going to look at his Ercoupe. Tell us a little about your Ercoupe, Ben.
Yeah, sure. So this is a 1946 Ercoupe 415C. So I purchased it earlier this year in March, and I've flown it about 95 hours since. So I absolutely love it. It's the best airplane I think you could have got for the price, at least. So this one, it's got a bit of a history behind it. So there's a lot of Ercoupes that are around like 2,000, 3,000 hours. This one's up at about 4,100 hours. So it's been used, that's for sure. It's got the C85, so a little more power than normal. It's the stroker, so -12F. And it's also got the cruise prop. So you can see that kind of up here, just the little bit steeper pitch. And that helps obviously on the top end. So do about 108, 110 miles an hour, burning about 5.5 gallons, which is pretty good as far as I'm concerned. So keeps the operating cost pretty low, which is always a plus for me. So I'm just trying to build hours, and this is about the most economical way to do that possible. So I guess we can talk a little bit about just kind of the design of the Ercoupe. So as you can see, it's a low wing, and if we come out here to the front, you can see it's got a pretty big dihedral. So that helps quite a bit with the stability of the airplane. The reason that's so important is this actually doesn't have rudder pedals. So it has the rudders, but they're all incorporated into the ailerons and the nose wheel, so that as you're flying, it'll mix those rudder inputs, keeping you coordinated. And then having that dihedral means the airplane, it'll essentially fly itself when you're up at cruise, if you get it trimmed out nice. So it's just an absolute blast to fly in that aspect.
And can you tell the people what a dihedral is?
Yeah, so if you look at the wing here, you can kind of see how it slopes up on each end. And so that's the dihedral. Basically, it allows that as the airplane rolls, one wing will then start creating a little bit more lift, and it'll help keep you level. That's basically the point of dihedral. If you look at aerobatic airplanes, you'll notice they're completely flat, and that allows them to be a lot more maneuverable without that dihedral. So we'll continue down along the airplane here. We have, if you look at the nose wheel, this is actually an STC. It's a modified nose wheel, so it is a lot stronger, a lot beefier than what is normally on an Ercoupe. And that also goes along with, this has the Cleveland Wheels and Brakes STC, and highly recommend it. It's totally worth it. But having this beefed up nose wheel, I mean, you can abuse it pretty bad, and it's not going to care. It'll go on with its day, and it'll keep you safe. So I really like having that. It has three fuel tanks. So there's one tank in each wing, and then one up here in the nose. And the reason they did that was so they could do gravity feed from the header tank to the engine, and then it uses a fuel pump. You can actually see it right here up in the engine. And that fuel pump will pump the fuel from the wings up to the header tank, so then it can gravity feed into the engine. And that process it's super reliable. It's the fewest parts that you could possibly do on an airplane with three tanks like this. And between them, it's 9 in each wing tank and 6 in the header. So it gives me about 24 gallons. And you know, that's burning 5.5 gallons an hour, you know, plus taxi time, things like that. You know, you can easily do 3.5 hours endurance and be perfectly happy with it. I've done 3.5 hours a couple times before, and you know, I've only gone down about maybe 2 gallons in my header tank. So keeping your VFR reserve and all that, but it's at that point you kind of need to use the bathroom. So I'd rather get on the ground and get some gas. But if you notice here, the fuel bobber, this is cork. So just like what you might see on like a Piper J3 Cub. It uses the cork as a bobber, and this is the only fuel indication you have on the airplane. So once this starts going down, you have about an hour of fuel left, then you kind of want to start looking for a place to land. So I have a custom-made, really advanced solution for measuring how much fuel I have, and it's a painter's dipstick that I marked on, and I shove that in the fuel tank, and then I can figure out how much time I have for flying. And with an airplane like this, I mean, it's so consistent, you can get pretty accurate with how much fuel you're using. So we'll go down the wing here, and you can see these are original navigation lights, so it's kind of a bullet style. I really like the aesthetic of it, but they don't work too well. So the sooner I can get an LED on that, I cannot wait to do that, make it a little bit more reliable. But some other things, as you come down, you can notice the ailerons are basically full span. So it's got really, really good roll rates and just controllability in general. You can't lift them up at all, and that's because it's, again, linked in through the rudders and the nose wheel. Obviously, it's just them sitting on the ground. It's not going to rotate at all. And actually, I will show one other thing. If we come out here to the wing, this is probably the best spot to view it at. But if you look down, you can actually see the landing gear there, and you'll notice it's a trailing link landing gear. And part of the reason, one, it results in super smooth landings practically all the time. It's really hard to mess up a landing in this thing. But when you're landing without rudder pedals, you might ask, how are you going to do that in a crosswind, for example? You can't, put your wing down. You can't line yourself a centerline. So instead, what they did was you just land in a crab. And with trailing link landing gear, because when you're landing in the crab, it'll grab the wheel and it'll basically caster you right along to the direction of travel, ideally down centerline. So really, really pretty much genius way of kind of solving that problem without the rudder pedals. And then of course, the smooth landings is a plus. So going also down, you can notice kind of the main aspect of an Ercoupe is the twin tail. So design idea behind this is basically trying to eliminate P-factor. Again, not having the rudder pedals, if you have P-factor, that can be a bit of an issue. So by offsetting the rudders or the vertical stabilizers, all the air is just going to go right through the middle, and you don't have to worry about any of those, engine effects or anything of that nature.
And explain P-factor to these folks, please.
Yeah, P-factor, it's basically as your engine, it's a combination of the torque from the engine and then the prop wash from the propeller going back and hitting the vertical stabilizer, and it'll push it to one side. And so then normally you have to counter that with, rudder, put a little bit of right rudder in during your takeoffs, landings, things like that. But by offsetting it like this, all that air just goes between them, and so you don't have to worry about that effect. And as for the torque aspect, you can just give it a little bit of aileron and rudder as part of that, and it's minimal enough to where it works out great. So some other things, again, really, really massive elevator here, but you'll notice this is as far up as it goes. So it's limited in up elevator, and the reason they did that is for when you get into a stall situation, this is going to stall first, and or sorry, this is not going to stall because you're not going to reach critical angle of attack, and so you just mush down because the wings are stalling first. And so on later models, they get rid of some of the up elevator travel. They allow you a little bit more rather, but on this 415C, that's as much as you get. And you would think maybe when you're landing, you have some issues with that, but it is such a responsive aircraft. You're never going to hit that full up elevator, and you can still get pretty close to a full stall landing. But you also don't necessarily need to hit a full stall. This airplane, you can land nearly 100 miles an hour, and the only downside is a little more wear and tear on the wheels, but it won't care. So the reason that happens is we can't really see it too well, but basically the wing, when you're sitting on the ground, has a slight negative angle of attack. And so when you have all the wheels on the ground, your wing's not going to fly. It's not going to be generating any lift. And so you have to actually give it up elevator to tell it to fly. It's not going to fly till it's told. And so the reason is then when you're at 100 miles an hour and say you're in really, really gusty winds and you just want to have control, you don't want to be slow, you just land faster, maybe not 100 miles an hour, but say you want to land at 80. The airplane can do it, and you put it down, it'll stick, and then you just slow down from there. The Cleveland wheels and brakes obviously help a whole lot with that. They're very, very strong. So here, both the rudders here, we can look at them. You notice there's not going to be a cutout here. Typically, you'll have a cutout to allow the rudder to go both directions, but the way this is designed is the rudder only moves out. So if you're turning to the left, this rudder would move out, and the other rudder wouldn't move at all. If you're turning to the right, that rudder would move out, and this rudder wouldn't move at all. So results in kind of a unique combination of flight controls, but again, it flies like a dream. It's so smooth. So coming on down, you can kind of look at the fuselage, and it's actually a very aerodynamically efficient airplane. If you look at something like a Cessna 150, it's got practically the same engine. Those are usually an 0200, which is 100 horse versus 85 in this case. But I do, basically the same speeds, if not a little bit more, as a 150, and most of that is then just down to it's very aerodynamically clean. For trim, this is basically all you got. It's a little piece of metal, bend that, and that's kind of how you'll trim out the airplane. But you can practically trim the airplane just by moving to one side of the cockpit or the other, and it'll respond accordingly. So this airplane also has out here on the wing, it's a ADS-B unit, so it's a wing unit. It's got the nav lights, capable of doing strobe lights, but I don't have those on this airplane, so I don't have that configured. But this will do my ADS-B out, and it's just sent in through the cockpit. There's a unit in there for that. Another interesting thing is you'll notice that it is fabric. So some Ercoupes have modifications where they'll be all metal, but I personally prefer the fabric. This is a slightly different fabric than what's stock. It's a little bit lighter, a little bit stronger. But supposedly, I can't completely attest to this. I've not really tested it myself, but supposedly the fabric wings are cleaner than the metallized wings. But I think kind of the historical vintage aspect of having the fabric, I think that's just super cool. This is the cockpit of the Ercoupe. This is basically all original, and you can see that it's missing a few things that you might have in a modern aircraft. So the biggest thing that you don't have is going to be an attitude indicator. So you have RPM, you have oil temp, oil pressure, you got your airspeed, which is in miles an hour. If you fly anything newer, that'll be a bit of a surprise to you. We got altitude, and then your vertical speed, and you got a whiskey compass. You have an ammeter over here, but there's no attitude indicator. You don't have any gyro instruments at all. No vacuum system on the airplane. And in fact, originally, these airplanes didn't even have an electrical system. It was just purely instruments like this, and you hand prop the engine. Now this is the 415C, so it had the electrical system, and it's extremely simple. Another interesting thing is the master switch is actually back here. So that's a little bit different than most aircraft, but that's because the battery's right down there underneath it. So you turn that on, and then you got basically 3 other switches in the whole cockpit, which is your master switch, your beacon, and then your navigation lights. So the way I have this airplane configured is the navigation lights also turn on the ADS-B out on the wing. There's a transponder down here. This is just an old style transponder. Radio, COM 760. This is a fantastic radio. It's only 1 active unit at a time. You can do 1 in standby just to switch between them. But very, very reliable unit. And from what I've heard, they're pretty sought after. So I was very pleased to be able to get this one in the airplane. Some other unique things. So what we mentioned earlier is not having rudder pedals. There is 1 pedal, and that is just your brake. And it's also directly connected up for the handbrake, and you can kind of see that moving a little bit with the handbrake there. So very, very unique. But the benefit is there's a lot of leg room. I can stretch my legs all the way out and not have a problem. And I'm, 5'10", 5'11". Oh, here's another really interesting thing. I have the mixture control here, but this has a Stromberg carburetor in the engine. So this is not directly adjusting a mixture control on the carburetor, but rather it's adjusting the air pressure in the venturi of the carburetor. And that's a little bit advanced, but basically the way the carburetor works is it'll, as the engine is going through its intake strokes, it's going to pull the fuel up through the carburetor. And the way the Stromberg carburetor works is it's adjusting how much fuel can get in based on atmospheric pressure. So I don't need to lean the airplane as I climb higher, because as I climb higher, atmospheric pressure drops, and then the carburetor will respond. So it's basically constantly at the perfect mixture. And all this is a fine adjustment for that air pressure. So I hardly ever need to use it. Sometimes if I'm up at cruise, I might lean it out just a little bit, but for the most part, it just stays full rich. That also leads to another bit of a problem sometimes, is you might wonder, how does the airplane shut down? And being a Stromberg carburetor, I have my fuel shutoff valve up underneath the panel. It's going to be way too hard to see, but I just shut off that fuel, run the carburetor out, and then the engine will naturally die. And so that works very, very well, and makes, when you start back up, if the engine's hot, makes starting it up a lot easier. So off to the left here is the prime unit. So this was rebuilt actually earlier this year, and it works really well. But just basically 2 shots of prime, and the engine will fire right up. And when it's hot, one shot of prime, maybe a little less, and the engine's totally happy with that. Up here, so it's got a very basic intercom system. It's Flightcom 403. Changed some stuff out on it just so it doesn't cut out every time I have a radio call come through. That was a big disappointment of mine when I first got it, is the intercom system was basically unusable because of that. So pulled it out, adjusted those settings, and it works beautifully, very reliable. Oh, here's another one. So looking back here, these are just nice little glove boxes. You just kind of put some small trinkets and stuff in there, and just nice to have a little bit of caddy storage, basically, if you want to stick a gun back there or whatever. Let's see, what else do we have? Down here, this is the headset, kind of where you plug in your headset, and then what I have is basically ran a cable from here up to the yoke for a nice big push to talk button. So a big red button for whenever you want to talk, which is good. This is what it typically is like. It's on the other side. It's just a little red button, and that's the push to talk for the passenger seat. Over here is, sorry we're bouncing around a little bit.
It's okay.
But down here we have the trim. So it's you hardly ever need to use it, but it just slides back and forth, and that's what will then adjust the trim on the back. So for the most part, you know, the airplane is going to be very stable throughout the flight. You're basically sitting right on the CG, so as you burn fuel and all that, your CG is changing very little. So typically, you know, you might adjust it a little bit between like landing and cruise maybe, and if anything, you know, I just kind of lean forward a little bit, and that trims out the airplane pretty well. This is the starter, actually, so it's a pull start, basically. So you'll pull this out, and then it pushes a spring in the starter, and that'll actually engage it, which is pretty unique. Not many airplanes are like that. This piece is actually extra. Typically, Ercoupes don't have it, and instead you have your window goes all the way up to the middle,
Okay.
and both of them will meet in the center. So it's basically kind of an open cockpit idea, but put this in basically to shield myself from the sun because it can get a little bright sometimes when you're flying. But I'll slide them both up, and I can do that on both sides here. And now the whole cabin's all nice and sealed, and it works pretty well. But one of my favorite things actually about the Ercoupe, I don't know if I said that before, but this is definitely my favorite thing, is you can actually fly this thing around at any speed and have the windows down, and it won't care.
How nice is that?
So if you're wanting to fly around at Sedona, put the windows down, look out, enjoy the view, and you know, just stick your arm out the window and just hang out, and the airplane won't care. So it'll lose maybe about 10 miles an hour on the speed, but that's about it. And you know, you're not flying an Ercoupe to get anywhere fast. You're flying an Ercoupe to, you know, either build time or just have fun and hang out. And it certainly does that really, really well.